I'm doing that on purpose now because I said to Nasa, have a rustling bag.
She's like a bold child. You tell her not to do something, she does it.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, you see.
Not me. I wouldn't presume to tell you to do anything.
Bit like Martin Foley. Anyway, so they were all talking about Martin Foley, right, this week, and I think people heard this story on the news and thought, "Oh my God," because there's a few things going on, and it's not as simple as a headline. You know, he has been so a judge granted Cab the order against his house plus the money that he owed. Okay, but it's not as simple as that. They don't just go in and collect the keys now and then collect the money for him. First of all, Foley doesn't seem to have any money. And second of all, in what I was describing as Last Chance Saloon, and you said one of many Last Chance Saloons, is that his wife Sonia has gone in now and claimed, taken high court proceedings against him as her husband, fighting that she owns half the house. So it's a bloody mess. So the Criminal Justice Bureau case against Foley, we reckon, is going back to what, the 90s, the late 90s?
Yeah, I think so. Because he as part of Martin Cahill, the General's gang, that would have been his peak earning time. And, you know, the gang were involved in some major heists and he was working as an enforcer with that. And so, I mean, that would have been his kind of, his main issue. So they figure then, they were looking at his unpaid taxes from 93 to 2000. I think it was two separate periods within that, over those 7 years, where there was obviously some money or some money trail being left behind. Stuff was being bought or money was being used, even if he was, you know, spending it and not actually acquiring any assets with it. It's still unpaid tax.
Yeah.
So that's what they were going after.
So that was when the Cab set up initially. They had two options. They could go for a proceeds of crime case, or they could go for a revenue case. So they assessed what they believed to be somebody's earnings in a particular period of time, and then they hit them with a tax bill for that. And recently, with the RTE documentary on Jerry the Monk Hutch and his sort of, I suppose, foray into the limelight with the election, his election candidacy, we did go back and hear all about his case, the Cab case. He would have been similar era and around a similar time that he was targeted by that young Cab, only set up since 96 after the murder of Veronica Guerin. And they, in the case of the Monk, they took a revenue case. He had properties he'd bought up. They assessed how much they believed he'd earned, and they hit him with a tax bill. Now, he settled with them. But Foley has just gone on and on and on. And as he has, this bill, which presumably surrounded his only property at 114 Cashel Avenue in Kimmage in the first place, has just risen to enormous amounts because of fines and delays.
Yeah, I mean, I think the total that was mentioned in the Dublin Circuit Civil Court last week was €916,960 and 12 cent.
He owes.
And it would have been just under 200,000 was the original amount. So it's accrued, you know, all the penalties and interest since then.
Right.
And his argument that he made in court was that he had, you know, there'd been a verbal deal with the guards, and that he had won, or he had brought a case against Charles Bowden, who would have been a member of the Gilligan gang, and he was giving evidence in the trial of Brian Meehan and the murder of Veronica Guerin, and more or less said that he loaded the machine gun used in one of the 4 attempts on gun attacks, assassination bids on Martin Foley, and he was told that, well, if he didn't go after Bowden for the 120,000 in damages, that they'd drop the revenue case against him. And this is the argument he was trying to. One of the arguments he was trying to use.
So he said that the Gardaí told him to go after Bowden for 120,000 in damages.
No, they said drop the case against Bowden.
Drop the case against Bowden.
Because he's a state witness. So they wanted him to go away, leave Bowden alone, and in return, the revenue case would stop. But he didn't provide any evidence of this.
Okay, this was just some sort of a conversation he's supposed to have had.
Yeah, this is what he understood the position was, and this is why apparently he made no attempts to pay off the bill or engage with revenue to settle the bill at any stage.
Right. And did he drop that case against?
Well, it didn't. Well, it never went ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, and you know, he was also, you know, it just never went ahead as far as I remember.
So it sat on the court list for a period of time because Foley's quite litigious, isn't he? and has been.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's got defamation cases against Penguin and the BBC as well, and I think that was mentioned that look, he could pay some of the outstanding revenue bill from this as well. But of course, there's no guarantee that he'll necessarily win those. So I mean, I don't think that cut any ice really either.
Yeah. Okay. So his position is he's with his wife Sonia for years. They have a 9-year-old child together. He's 74 and she, we reckon, is about 50 years of age. They obviously knew that this circuit civil court, is that what you call it?
Yeah, it's a civil court, but it's at circuit level as opposed to high court level.
Okay. That this was coming and this could culminate in this order to to give the cab a charge over the property and, order him to pay back that money. So in the meantime, and at the last minute, his wife Sonia pitched into the High Court to say, actually, I own half this house, so nothing can happen now.
Yeah, so
that case proceeds.
Yeah, last week then, so I don't know, whatever it was, I think 5 days before the civil case was heard in the circuit court, there was papers lodged in the High Court in which she is bringing a case apparently against her husband to basically assert her right to half the house, which he inherited from his mother and which, in fairness, wasn't bought with the proceeds of crime. But she's going to try and get a court ruling to say that she owns half the house, which was an argument that was put forward in the circuit civil case, and was shot down by the judge, who said, "Look, that it doesn't stand up. It was registered. It's still registered in Foley's name and his late wife's name." So the judge ruled basically that Sonia had no ownership interest in the house, and therefore couldn't make that argument. But whether or not a High Court will entertain this case, or whether they might decide to appeal the circuit civil case, that's still going. So when we're talking about the very many last chance saloons, this is where that's going. Like, depending on whether or not they can afford the
And where
lawyers.
does the money come for all these lawyers? And I mean, the High Court, like, you don't get to go to the High Court on free legal aid.
No, you don't. Well, I'm not sure, to be honest. I mean, Martin Foley, I know, has defended himself in the past. I don't think he did in this case. It's easier to get it possibly when you have other defamation cases and so on going, that there's lawyers for good reason will say, well, look, we'll represent you in this case. It's not a criminal case, so they're not obliged to represent him. So I mean, they'll weigh that up and figure, look, it's possibly winnable here, and there will be a fee at the end of the day, and which is their prerogative. It's it's entirely up to themselves, like whether they think that there's a winnable case or a winnable action.
I mean, it's sort of like screaming of the John Gilligan situation. Of course, he was one of the first to be hit by the Criminal Assets Bureau. He identified that.
In a way, he did them a great favour. Because I mean, he tested every bolt and nut and every letter and crossed T and dotted I in the legislation, that everything was appealed, and there was Supreme Court decisions. And if not that I do, but the odd time you look at case law involving the proceeds of crime, a lot of it is Gilligan versus Cab, Gilligan versus Cab, whether it's him or his wife or someone else connected to the family. So,
it's regularly brought up. But that was a proceeds of crime case. So maybe the end of that is simpler than the end of this revenue case when you're trying to chase money from somebody.
Yeah, I suppose the proceeds of crime is a bit unusual in that, okay, it's civil law, but it's dealing entirely with criminal matters and criminal money. Revenue matters in a way that it's blind to whether or not it's criminal money or legit money. It's the sheriff still comes knocking on the door, which we saw in this case with the Foleys and the Cayman. The realisable assets they found came to €2,503. So
that's what they have.
Yeah, so they've got, of the just over 900,000, they've got €2,503 back
in their bank account.
Well, that's what revenue have now, or the sheriff has managed
collected.
To recover.
Okay.
Out of the larger sum. So obviously the house in Cashel Avenue is the only asset that they can really turn into cash at any stage. So, but I mean, I don't think a house in Cashel Avenue is going to go for 916,000 anytime soon. So,
and it's their family home, and as you say, it's been handed down to him. Like, is there? We're maybe getting a little bit. Might need a lawyer on here, but there's always been this notion that the family home is protected no matter what under Irish law. I don't think that is the case. Even in divorce proceedings, the family home is no longer just left with the, one parent over
Yeah.
another. If there's enough assets in the family home for it to be divided, it will be divided.
Yeah, it's not an absolute right. I think in the past it would have been treated as an absolute right, but I think different cases have moved on the law since. And the phrase that I hear in the proceeds of crime hearing all the time is that if an injustice won't be done, it can be sold, it can be seized, and what has been done is there's been a delay to allow a family to move out and to find new schools, so that and they won't do it like in the middle of the school year. They'll wait till kind of the end of June or or the end of August, depending on whether it's the beginning or the start of the school year, and that's when they'll say you have till then to find new accommodation, and that we think you have the means and you do have other places to go. And of course, CAB will go and say, look, they do have other places they can go and they're not going to be homeless. And it makes it easier for a judge to decide in that case. But I mean, when it comes down to it with the proceeds of crime, if it's bought with the proceeds of crime, that's it. It's the proceeds of crime. And it's very hard to get around that once that kind of Section 3 order is made, once they say that this is bought with whatever.
You talked about him in his heyday when the CAB case sort of started. So he was, just a little bit of background on him, he was a member of the General Cahill's mob. Cahill was killed, murdered in 1994 in Ranelagh. What?
I just remember.
Just plucked that from the back of my head there. Belgrave Square, I think, in Ranelagh, if I'm right. Now, I won't remember my own name.
That neck of the woods, all right, yeah. And
or what year I was born, anything like that. But I remember
the high-vis vest and the clipboard, who was
down in the weeds detail. But so he was part of the General's crew, and he would have been suspected to have been involved in those famous Rusborough house raids.
Yeah.
Now, he's long denied everything, hasn't he?
And the O'Connor's jewellery store was the big robbery. That was 2.5 million worth of
back
jewelry.
In what, 1990, was it?
83.
Right.
So, I mean, and that didn't they put them out of business, basically, essentially? They did. That company was gone, a long-standing company in
that's a
Dublin.
Huge amount of money.
Yeah. And of course, we don't know exactly his role, but he was considered as an enforcer in the gang at the time, and whether he got any kind of share out of that, we don't know. Presumably he'll say he didn't.
Since the General died, he's been floating around kind of between various crews and, making friends and making enemies at the same time. He's been shot, legendary, a number of times and survived it.
4 times. Well, on 4 occasions.
Right.
More than 4 times.
And was all of that after Cahill died?
No. Because the first time his life was in, there was an attempt on his life, a possible attempt on his life was 94.
Right.
When the IRA kidnapped him and had him in the back of a van, and there was a shootout in the Phoenix Park and the guards rescued him. So that was before, I think, is it?
Yeah,
we'll have to look at that.
That was the same
around
year.
the same time.
94
yeah,
is the same year now that Cahill. But sure, of course, they were in trouble with the paramilitaries, which is
possibly the reason why. But the first time he ended up getting shot was in 95. He got out of a car in Fatima Mansions, and he was shot in, I think, the arm and the stomach. And that was the first kind of serious attempts on his life. Presumably, if the kidnapping by the IRA wasn't an attempt on his life.
Mm-hmm. So he managed to recover from that.
He was, and then was shot again in 1996. And then that was, I think, wasn't it? I think in 2000 then, at the time when he was leaving the swimming pool in Terranure College, and he was shot a number of times then. And the last time was in 2008 as he left the gym again in Kimmage.
Yes.
In these Audi A6.
There was 2 shootings outside the gyms.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a routine, that's where they get you. I mean, it's Christy Keane's routine in Limerick nearly got him killed as well, going to the early morning gym.
And 2008 was suspected of being his own nephew, James Quinn, who is now serving life for, or certainly up to life.
It's a 22-year sentence in Spain. And I know that because I read it about 5 minutes ago.
Okay, good, for the murder of Gary Hutch. But he had kind of, at that point in 2008, fallen out with the Kinahan crew over allegations of informing or whatever it was. The usual.
I mean, when you think about it, he was kind of identified as being on the side of, which would have been, the Byrne organised crime group, or that group during the kind of the Crumlin Drimnagh feud, and survived presumably being targeted by the Rattigan faction. He survived being targeted by Martin Cahill, the John Gilligan's gang. He survived being targeted by the IRA.
Why did the
And,
Gilligan gang target him that time? Do you remember?
well, I can't remember exactly, but it's the usual things. I'd imagine
Yeah.
it's money or a woman.
I was going to say money or informing, but money or a woman. Allegations of informing, not suggesting anyone's an informer, of course, but they're usually thrown about, aren't they? So yeah, he's pissed off everybody, Foley, hasn't he, over the years?
And just about survived. And I mean, he must have suffered some long-term injuries. I mean, he was shot in the finger and shot in the chest, and it's. I mean, it has to take a toll. Although our colleague Clodagh was in court and said he was a very sprightly looking 74-year-old, looked
I used
well
to
and
see
fit.
him all the time when I used to live near him, and he was always on a bike and, oh yeah, fit as, I mean, kind of like in the gym, hard. And he always said himself and prided himself on the fact that his muscles were so hard that the bullets sort of stopped without going through the muscle into the organs, and that's what always saved him from being killed. But it's extraordinary. And at 72, 74, we said, he's now fighting for his home, for that original house on Cashel Avenue that his mother left him.
Yeah.
Where did any wealth go over the years that he ever accrued?
And was there? I mean, his more recent version that we've seen is this Viper debt recovery, which has got him in trouble. I think, wasn't there a fine down in Wexford, and he's turned up in various places, and we've seen him with different people turning up to make demands. I don't think there was ever any great money in that. We used to look at the company accounts. I don't think there was any surprises there. Wasn't it Troy Jordan at one point was seen working with him?
He was working with them, and more recently he was working with a guy called Jonathan Gill,
who was, of course, also named in a cab recently as being part of the Pascal Kelly crew. So, I mean, there's a guy who's, it just shows you kind of, I suppose, Foley's depth of contacts in the underworld, which has probably saved him as much as his muscles. I mean, it's probably got him into as much trouble, but also probably helped save his life to some extent, that, that there's probably enough people out there who, willing to work with him or willing not to take part in a reason to kill him.
And somebody like him who has been thwarting the court system all these years. So he's claiming that, a conversation was had with Gardaí that if he dropped the case he had against Bowden, that they would leave him off this original 200,000 revenue bill that he had. So as a result, he says he didn't pay any of that bill all along. But the cab case against him, against Foley, which was being listed constantly in the proceeds of crime, so that eventually must have come off that list. Because I remember when I was covering the proceeds of crime case, it was still there. It was still on that. So he must have taken a load of sort of challenges against the Criminal Assets Bureau original case. They have clearly now got to the end of their case with him, and it's now moved to the civil courts, where it's the job of the civil courts for the Criminal Assets Bureau to get orders to move in on that house as a way of collecting some of the money.
I'd say there were parallel cases because, I mean, you wouldn't necessarily move. The criminal assets cases would have to be criminal assets, and the house was an inheritance from his mother, so it was never bought.
Yeah.
Now, unless, again, as we see, unless there was like €500,000 worth of renovations done, in which case they'll say, well, this is criminal money because of all the renovations done, so therefore we can take it and sell it and keep 500,000. But Foley's hasn't been on the cabinet list for at least 3 years, I'd say.
Yeah.
It hasn't come up any of the times I've been there.
So what we can say is, in about 3 or 4 years, they have been all the while trying to get an order on this home as a way of settling some of this bill, which is almost €1 million now at this stage. Clearly, there's no money in the bank with the Foleys that can be identified as, for them paying up. And also, how do you make people pay up? I had a contact recently from somebody I wrote a story about nearly 30 years ago who was awarded an amount of money. A neighbour was ordered to pay over a dispute, and they've never been paid. How do you... You just have to keep dragging people back to court, and if they don't pay, they don't pay. They're eventually threatened with a few days in jail. He'd do that with his hands tied behind his back.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I mean, well, it's contempt of court. So, I mean, a judge can say, well, look, you got to pay it. And if you don't, I'm going to jail you until you do pay it. So, I mean, we can see if someone decides to ignore the High Court, and there's a famous case involving Enoch Burke, who has, hasn't apologised hasn't made an undertaking not to appear in court or not to appear at the school where there's an injunction against him. And so, I mean, if somebody just ignores whatever it is, a 10 grand order from the sheriff, I mean, it does mean it only works if you don't really have anything. I mean, if you have a car that's paid for and sitting out on your driveway and it's worth 10 grand, the sheriff can come and take it and sell it and give the money to the person who is owed the money. So, I mean, and they can go into your house and take, they can take all your clothes, they can take your TV,
take the TV, whatever,
and go away for 2 years and then come back and do it again. Right? So I mean, you'd want to have, a hard neck, I'd say, to kind of do that. But, again, I suppose if people know the system a little bit, and I guess if you pay a certain amount and you've made promises that you're going to pay a bit more when you get more money, and, you can try and drag things out. And a lot of people, if it's a relatively small amount, don't have the stomach for it. And that's the issue, And
you'd wonder, really, is, obviously the house is the only valuable asset they have, but ultimately, even if the High Court don't accept Sonia Foley's case that she owns half of it, she's ultimately looking to stay in that house, I imagine, until her daughter comes of age or is educated or whatever it is. Or maybe she's looking to stay on in that house for the rest of her. If she owns 50% of it, they either have to come up with Foley's 50%, or if they sell it, she'll get 50% or whatever. But I mean, in the end of the day, nobody's going to want an actual eviction of a mother and her child, or him. A physical eviction is really the last thing anybody wants here. And it seems with Foley, that's the way he's headed and is prepared to sit it out no matter what.
But it also gets to the point then you can't go to the pub or nip out to the gym, because when you come back, the locks will be changed and the windows boarded up. Yeah, I mean, they're not going to necessarily go in and get someone in a headlock. If there's a court order, I mean, essentially, where it's the sheriff or the criminal assets bureau, if they have a court order, say they own the property, it is their property. And it's as simple as that. So, I mean, unless you're going to sit in there, but if you have to go out to the shopping centre or go out to the supermarket to buy a few things, it's going to be locked up. Well,
it sounds like a total mess to me still, and nobody's fault on that. But the other day, when somebody who would have no interest in this phoned me and said, Martin Foley's after losing his house and he has to pay back like $500,000 or something. And I went, I'll have a little look at that. I'm not sure that's exactly the end of this story, but...
No, it's funny the way sometimes these stories just capture a bit of the public imagination.
Exactly.
But, I mean, he's been around so long. I mean, we've had trouble trying to remember exactly what it was all about. I mean, if you remember, it was his pal Shava Hogan that was shot. And I think that was actually what caused them to fall out with the general. And then I think then Cahill was shot. And then the first time Foley was attacked, it was a couple of months after that. So, but not that he had nothing to do, or it's not thought that he had anything to do with it. And I think the reason the Gilligans wanted to kill him was that he was being blamed for spreading rumours that Gilligan was selling heroin.
Right.
And that he had spread these rumours, obviously, to try and get him off the pitch to, I don't know, to do business himself or allow someone else to do business who was paying him. So it was all that kind of underworld dark arts at play.
He managed to bury the hatchet as such with the Kinahans, because he was, by the time you get to 2016, he's one of the mourners at the Byrne household who goes to pay his respects to Sadie and the late Jaws Byrne, who have their son murdered, David Byrne, laid out there in the house before that funeral. So that he's managed to settle things with them. And I don't think he has been under any threat since then, 2008. So he's on a good roll with that.
He seems pretty, he's not hiding. He's living quite openly.
Yeah.
I mean, he's turned up at various kind of, when he's had court issues, whether it was down in Wexford, he's turned up and he's not exactly in hiding. I mean, and I don't think that's actually has been used in any of the reasons why he can't go living in a rental place because of a threat to his life or anything like that. So he does seem to be kind of, has gone past that, where he's a target for God knows what faction. Or maybe things have just calmed down a bit, and things aren't as wild as they were.
No, indeed. Okay, well, look, I'd say we'll certainly be back to this, because I don't believe it's anywhere near its end. Thanks, Eamon.
Always a pleasure, Nicola.
Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.